After the pilot chute is thrown, the skydiver will count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and check his canopy. On the check, he looks over his right shoulder to visually confirm that the canopy has opened, or it is at least in the process of opening. First, perform a visual canopy check. As was discussed in the malfunction procedures, this check is done from top to bottom, and corrections are made from the bottom to the top. After any corrections are made, a controllability check will be performed. It is important to note that the skydiver becomes a canopy pilot after the parachute is open and will need to focus his thoughts on the task of piloting his parachute to a safe and successful landing. After the canopy is confirmed open and the line twists are cleared, reach up and put your hands firmly through the yellow steering toggles located on the rear risers. You will notice that there is some excess stowed line by each toggle. This is stowed steering line waiting to be released. Parachutes are designed to open with the toggle stowed to the half brake or number 2 position. This keeps the canopy flying at an idle position until the skydiver is ready to control it. Setting the brakes and stowing the excess line is done each time the parachute is repacked for its next use. Each steering line passes through a retaining ring on the back of each rear riser. As the canopy opens, the steering line is pulled tight against the retaining ring. This keeps the steering toggle locked firmly into place. The steering lines are also called brake lines. To unstow the brakes, simply grab the toggles and pull down. This pulls the toggles away from the retaining ring and allows them to slip off the loop, which locks them in place. When you pull down the toggles for the first time, this is called unstowing the brakes. When the pilot unstows the brakes, the trailing edge of the canopy will become slightly higher than the leading edge of the canopy. This produces the gliding attitude, and the canopy will accelerate to full flight. The leading edge is often called the nose of the canopy, and the trailing edge is often called the tail. Once the toggles are in your hands, keep your hands firmly through them all the way to the ground until you have landed. Keeping your hands through the toggles is like a pilot keeping his hands on the controls of his airplane. The only reason to remove them is if you discover a problem with the parachute during the controllability check and you need to execute your emergency procedures. Normally, as the canopy begins to inflate and the slider begins to descend, it will travel at least to the halfway point down the lines. Rarely is the slider alone a reason for emergency procedures, but you must always visually confirm that it is down far enough. If the slider comes roughly halfway down the lines, it will allow the parachute to open. But if it does not travel all the way down, it can be brought down manually. This procedure is sometimes called pumping the brakes or pumping the slider. Pulling both toggles down to full arm extension, then raising them gently back to full flight, will usually bring the slider the rest of the way down the lines. This is a common procedure and is easily done. If you see one or both end cells flapping or uninflated, they can also be opened manually. The procedure is the same as pumping the brakes or pumping the slider, so simply repeat the process until the end cells are inflated. If the parachute begins to rock backward during this process, let the toggles up gently and try again. Once the end cells are completely open, smoothly let the toggles back up to the full flight position. If the canopy opens straight and normal and one brake released for whatever reason, the canopy would begin a rapid turn. The result is that the canopy turns toward the still stowed brake. The correction for this is to reach up and pull both toggles to unstow the brake. Pulling both toggles will eliminate the decision of which toggle to pull. If the parachute is still turning after both brakes are unstowed, emergency procedures must be initiated. The upper end of each steering line is connected to several smaller lines which fan out and are sewn to the trailing edge of the canopy. When the Canopy pilot pulls both toggles down, he is pulling down the entire trailing edge of the canopy. By doing this, greater resistance is created horizontally against the flow of air around the canopy, and the canopy will slow down. The further down the toggles are pulled, the more forward speed will be reduced until a canopy stall is produced. All square canopies have 5 modes of flight: full flight, quarter brakes or the number 1 position, half brakes or the number 2 position, full brakes or the number 3 position, and stall. A normal landing is either in the number 2 half brake position or the number 3 full brake position. Landing in the full flight mode, the number 1 position, or in a stall is likely to cause injury and should be avoided. Full flight is achieved by flying with the toggles all the way up, which streamlines the parachute. This produces the least drag and creates the optimum amount of lift, thereby offering the best horizontal and glide characteristics. Parachutes can be safely flown in all flight modes but stall. However, they glide, maneuver, and perform best when flown in the full flight mode. In the quarter brakes or number 1 position, the toggles are pulled equally down level with the pilot's shoulders. This mode of flight is used to fly the parachute at a slightly slower speed than full flight. It is also used as a reference point for beginning the flare for landing the parachute. This is the mode of flight in which the canopy is set for opening. In the half brakes or number 2 position, the toggles are equally pulled down level with the canopy pilot's hip bones, which causes the canopy to slow down. This is because the trailing edge is pulled down even with the leading edge, and a cupping action slows the canopy to half speed. The full brakes mode or number 3 position causes the canopy to flare. This is because pulling the toggles fully down reduces the canopy's forward speed and the canopy's vertical descent at the same time until it reaches the flare point. The number 3 full brake position is the ideal mode in which to touch down for landing. When in full flight, you will have the opportunity to practice a flare for landing. This is done starting in the full flight position with the toggles fully up. They are then pulled evenly downward to the number 1, number 2, and finally to the number 3 position. Your canopy will slow as the leading edge raises. The cupping effect of the tail will produce a braking action which creates additional lift. This slows both the vertical and horizontal speed. The flare is the optimum mode of flight for landing the parachute. Landing in the number 2 position will also produce an acceptable landing in most cases. The flare is in effect before the stall and will exist as long as the canopy has some forward speed. The flare should not be started higher than 15 feet because a stall could develop before touchdown. There are about 5 to 10 seconds of flare before the canopy will begin to enter a stall. If the flare is initiated too high, the canopy pilot will land in a backward rocking motion. Your landing count will start in the full flight position and follow through to positions number 1, 2, and 3. This landing count, when begun approximately at 15 feet above the ground and finished prior to touching the ground, will usually produce the best landing. A maneuver called a brake turn can be used when the pilot needs to turn but wants to lose only the minimum amount of altitude. To perform this turn, both toggles are pulled to at least the number 1 or quartered brake position. Then the toggle in the direction of the desired turn is pulled a few inches lower than the opposite toggle. This slower type of turn can be used when the pilot is avoiding obstacles at the last moment. It should be stressed, however, that the canopy pilot is still at a great risk of injury when landing in a brake turn. The brake turn is preferable to a last-moment panic turn, in which the pilot spirals into the ground at a higher rate of speed. An abrupt turn performed within the last 100 feet of descent will virtually guarantee a serious injury or even death. Always choose your landing area and flight plan by 1,000 feet, especially if you are landing off the drop zone. If you follow your flight plan and make your decisions about landing at a higher altitude, maneuvers such as brake turns will not be necessary. It is the sole responsibility of the Canopy pilot to ensure that a canopy is indeed safe to land. Remember that you are now a Canopy pilot and the ultimate decision of where and how you will land rests on you alone. As in all aviation, the pilot in command is responsible for making the decisions that affect the safety and success of the flight. In most cases, you will have radio assistance which will help you to locate the drop zone, maneuver, and land the canopy. However, as pilot in command, you have the authority to do whatever is necessary to ensure a successful landing. Once you are confident that the parachute will land you safely, it is time to enjoy the canopy flight. Most parachutes have a forward speed of 20 miles per hour. If the canopy is flying in wind conditions of 10 miles per hour, it will have a higher or lower ground speed depending on which way the canopy faces. If the pilot faces directly into the 10 mile per hour wind, its speed across the ground will be 10 miles per hour. Flying facing into the wind is called holding. When traveling across the wind's direction, the canopy will fly ahead at 20 miles per hour, but will also be moving sideways across the ground. Flying across the wind line is called crabbing. If the pilot faces directly away from the 10 mile an hour wind, its speed across the ground will be 30 miles per hour. Flying with the wind is called running. More distance can be covered across the ground when traveling with the wind. For this reason, the skydivers exit the aircraft upwind of the landing area and use the wind to maneuver to the target. In a zero wind condition, the canopy's speed and range it can travel across the ground will be the same in all directions. In this situation, the skydivers will exit the aircraft directly over the landing area. Most of the time, there is a prevailing wind from one direction or another. In these conditions, a common mistake is for the canopy pilot to run toward the landing area and then have to hold into the wind until landing. It is better to stay upwind of the landing area and work towards the target by flying crosswind back and forth. Remember that turning causes a more rapid loss of altitude. Below 1,500 feet, no turns in excess of 360 degrees should be performed. Below 1,000 feet, turns should not be done in excess of 180 degrees at a time. Below 500 feet, only 90-degree turns should be performed. By 300 feet above the ground, turns should not exceed 45 degrees, and the parachute should be set up into the wind and only slight toggle corrections should be used. In order to allow canopy pilots a reference point and a procedure for landing, there are two important concepts that must be learned. First is the 1,000-foot holding area, and second is the landing pattern. The 1,000-foot holding area is an imaginary point upwind of the landing area. Each canopy pilot should try to fly his canopy into this area when he is getting close to 1,000 feet above the ground. Being in this area at the right altitude greatly improves the chances of setting up properly to fly a successful landing pattern. The landing pattern is a path around the landing area which all canopies fly in order to approach and land without interfering with each other. From the 1,000-foot holding area, the canopy pilot will fly past the landing area with the intended touchdown point at his left side. The wind will be at his back, so this is called the downwind leg of the pattern. At approximately 600 feet, he will turn 90 degrees to his left and fly crosswind. The landing area will still be to his left. This is called the base leg or crosswind leg of the pattern. At approximately 300 feet above the ground, the final 90-degree turn is made when downwind of the intended touchdown point. This is called the final approach, and this last left-hand turn will usually have the pilot faced directly into the wind. The location of the 1,000-foot holding area and the size and direction of the landing pattern change with different wind patterns and conditions. It is common for them to be altered periodically throughout the day. These will be discussed in detail in the practical section of your class. Each Canopy pilot is responsible for reviewing a flight plan prior to every jump. Facing into the wind causes the parachute to have its slowest possible speed across the ground. The best way to determine wind direction is by looking at the windsock. Many times a wind streamer or wind blade is also available. A few other wind indicators would be the movement of trees or smoke. Although the best landing is made facing into the wind, it is better to land crosswind or downwind than to run into trees, wires, harmful obstacles, or to risk a last-moment panic turn to get facing into the wind. At times, the wind may turn the canopy slightly off the intended wind line while it is on final approach. It is permissible to make slight corrections, but usually being off the wind line will make very little difference. Therefore, it is best to concentrate on landing with your canopy flying straight and level in a clear and open area and at least the number 2 half-brake position. When performed properly, the number 3 full brake position will provide a flare which slows both the horizontal and vertical speed nearly to 0. Of course, a 0 rate of descent would be a nice way to land, but that is not always possible. If the toggles are in the number 3 full brake position for too long, a stall may develop. If a stall begins to develop, the correction would be to smoothly put the toggles up to the number 2 half brake position. This will allow the nose to lower and the canopy to begin flying forward again. In most cases, the radio operator will help you with the landing count, starting with full flight and going through to position 1, 2, and 3. If for any reason a flare with the number 3 full brake position is not possible, landing the canopy in the number 2 half brake position is the preferred option. For instance, if the landing is off the airport or on a sloping terrain, it would be better to let the canopy fly forward at half brakes instead of risking a stall flying at full brakes. In any case, landing in at least the number 2 half brakes position is the minimum action needed to provide an acceptable landing.